Welcome back to another episode of Alternative Space History. I am your host, So Not the Hero Type. The year is 1958. And we're going to start off with a Manny 1 impactor probe launch. This launch is to basically impact the lunar surface with a probe. It's not the first time we've done this, nor will it be the last. But that's because we need to learn everything we can about the lunar surface so we can eventually put man in a ship, yeet them to the moon, land them, and hopefully bring them back safely. But with that introduction out of the way, let's get back to the role-playing aspect of the game. The Osiris-2 launch vehicle we have used several times before, and it had a perfect base stage launch. All 5 engines ignited, coasted the LR-105 main stage up into the upper atmosphere, separated beautifully with that 4-booster separation, and managed to carry our lunar injection stage into orbit. Once in orbit, our lunar injection stage was set on a course to impact the side of the moon. What we wanted to do to keep space free of a bunch of junk made by us, we decided to put the main injection stage on a lunar impact, separate the stages, and do some micro adjustments with the impactor probe to make sure both of them would impact the side of the moon and not leave debris in space. Unfortunately, as we approached the moon, my dog unplugged my capture card and I lost a bit of footage. So here's the surface of the moon. We successfully impacted the side, gained some science, and finished that contract. Now we switch back over to Vandenberg Space Center and buy the much needed pad upgrade so it can start doing low Earth orbit satellite contracts as well as train our new upcoming pilots. That way we can focus on our interplanetary and lunar missions over at our main space center. Which back at the Cape we have J. Fox Karmen launching the new X-07 Explorer. This is going to be a 90-kilometer altitude test run. We want to make sure this new capsule we just got done researching has the capability of surpassing the 75K marker, in which we were restricted to prior, and keep the crew alive. J. Fox himself had actually volunteered for this mission because he wanted to be one of the first men to surpass the 100-kilometer mark and live to tell about it. Unfortunately, due to new safety regulations, the R&D department told him not to pass too much farther over the 90K mark until they can recover the data from this flight if he so survives. But J. Fox Karmen, notoriously being a daredevil, managed to hit the 90-kilometer mark and go about 1,500 meters more above. Now it was a true test to see if he can come back in through re-entry and survive. The only real issue he noticed while he was up breaking altitude records was the RCS system wasn't quite up to par to keep the bigger craft under control while out of the atmosphere. He decided he would let the R&D team know about this as soon as he brought it back down and hopefully landed. Hitting speeds of over 1,000 meters per second as they hit the thicker parts of the atmosphere, the increased drag profile designed by the R&D team worked wonderfully with helping bleed off speed. The air brakes launched, everything came down. There was a little bit of an issue with the front wheel as it made it bounce a little bit on the runway, but all was good. J. Fox survived. After a brief conversation with the R&D team, they gave J. Fox what he had requested, an upgraded RCS system. This new system was using some new tech that they had researched during Project Lunar Capture. Back to the VAB, using that same tech that we were just talking about, the team was designing a probe that could catch an orbit around the lunar surface. Now, because there's no atmosphere on the moon, there is no other way to catch an orbit outside of using some sort of propulsion system. They decided to use an RCS system since it would be the most lightweight, most reliable, and easiest system to control without having full control over the probe. But this also meant that they needed a new injection system, so they decided to upgrade the original LI-1 and turn it into the LI-2, the Lunar Injection number 2. As unfortunately, our R&D team is nowhere near good at making names for projects, but they're great at building them. Using the new integral tank system that was recently researched as well made these tanks a lot lighter and could carry a higher capacity of fuel. This opened up a whole new world of opportunities for future missions. Now, due to the increased size of the new injection stage and orbiter, we realized that the Osiris-2 didn't quite have the payload capacity to get it into orbit. Rather than designing a brand new launch vehicle, they decided that with some of the new tech they researched, they were going to upgrade the upper stage, as well as add 2 new upgraded variants of the LR-79 and LR-105 to the main booster. After doing some math, they realized this was exactly what they needed to carry the much heavier payload into orbit without spending a whole bunch of extra money. This will be known as the Osiris-2 Advanced from now on. Because of this, the R&D team did decide that they may need to design a new launch vehicle, possibly making the Osiris-3, as new antenna tech means they can start sending probes interplanetary. But back over to the launch pad, we have the Manny-1 Impactor Probe number 2 on its way to the surface of the moon. This will be the final probe we launch to the moon if everything goes according to plan. We do currently have another one building just in case we have any failures, but we are hopeful to say the least. Realizing there's not much more scientific discovery we can get by crashing probes onto the moon, we knew we needed to focus on orbiting the moon. That way we can pick out a landing spot and land our first autonomous probes onto the surface. But with that, the Manny-1 on the Osiris-2 successfully got into orbit, and we got our projected path on its way to the lunar surface. Everything went swimmingly in this particular mission as the probe made its way down to the surface of the moon. Now, with my dog not being in the room, there was no capture card issues, so we get a beautiful impact with the giant blue marble in the distant background, thus completing the final impactor probe mission for New Horizons Space Agency. Moving forward from here on out to attempt to orbit the wonderful lunar moon as well as land on it, pushing us even further to having a man step foot on the moon. But speaking of manned spaceflight, we have a special guest for you, introducing Carnasa from CSA Space Agency, once again coming back to try out our newest ship, the XO7 Serenity.
This is Mission Control. Can you hear us? Are all systems go? Yes, Ground Control. All systems are fine. We are good to go. We hear you loud and clear. Go ahead and proceed with mission. Our sensors show you're about to breach the Karmen line. Can you please confirm? Mission Control, we have entered space. If you saw the sights from up here, you wouldn't want to come back down. It's absolutely beautiful up here. Copy that. We hear you loud and clear. Congratulations. You have just made history.
morning. My name is Bobbi Karmen, and we are standing here today with Carnasa Karmen, the first man to enter space and return home. The whole world is wondering, how does it feel to be the first man to ever touch the edges of our world and enter space?
When I looked out of my window and I saw the curvature of the Earth open up in front of me, I was completely blown away. Honestly, it was an experience like no other. Looking to the future, I'm very excited for the missions to come, and I'm very keen for humanity to make their way to space and to stay.
Our next flight is our very first launch from Vandenberg Space Center, with Oliver Karmen flying the X-05 Scout prototype. Using a slightly different wing profile due to a offset center of mass, the X-05 Scout has a camera built in behind the cockpit to take aerial photos to help generate science from a new area we have yet to fly over. All systems seem to be going okay, and Oliver Karmen is reporting no major issues. Being it's his first time flying at Vandenberg, he was a little nervous about finding where the Space Center's landing strip would be. So nervous, in fact, he forgot to activate the SRB boosters in the back of the plane to kick him up to speed, which unfortunately means until he drains the SRBs, he will not be able to land. Because he had to kick the SRBs off late, he was coming in way too fast to get a proper landing. After coasting over the Space Center, he decided to try to turn around and come back at the runway from a different angle. Unfortunately, due to the fact this is a prototype, there was a little bit of an issue. During his initial pitch to try to come back, Oliver Karmen pulled up a little too hard, causing the plane to stall out and spiral out of control. Luckily, we kept the same injection system from the first X-05 series plane, so he was able to safely fall back to the water. Unfortunately, not able to recover the data from the camera due to it blowing up on impact, we were at least able to save Oliver Karmen's life so he could live to fly another day. Oliver Karmen is ready to get back into the saddle and fly the new X-05 Scout 2, which will be slightly adjusted to help prevent the issues in the future. But we move back to the launch pad for the very first launch of the Manny 2 on the Osiris 2 Advanced. This will be our first attempt to orbit the lunar surface, as well as sending over new scientific experiments that have yet to be used outside of low Earth orbits. The teams at ground control were hopeful yet slightly nervous due to these being a new variant of engine on all three stages. Luckily enough, because of the extra pre-flight checks and telemetry data we've acquired, both the first booster stage as well as the secondary AJ-10 stage was successful in its ignition, thus carrying the lunar injection stage into orbit to prepare for a lunar injection burn. Unlike before, this particular burn was going to be designed to capture an orbit at the moon, not impact it. However, we did decide to set the lunar injection stage up for an impaction course. That way it was not left floating out in space, and we used the RCS control on the orbiting probe to realign itself so it could be at a nice low orbit of around 30,000 meters above the lunar surface. The team also packed a little extra delta V so they can slightly adjust the inclination of the orbit so they can hit different biomes than they've seen previously. Part of the probe's programming was to catch an eccentric orbit of 30 kilometers by 1,700 kilometers, and once at the top of its orbit, slightly adjust its inclination so the early TV camera they have on board can get footage of previously unseen areas on the lunar surface. The next probe we are going to launch will be at a slightly different inclination orbit to also try and catch a little bit more of the lunar surface, eventually hoping to get scan-sat technology to give us a proper understanding of how the lunar surface looks, thus prepping us for future manned spaceflight as well as probe lunar landings. Using some of the data that they received from the lunar orbiter thus far, they decided to unlock a new type of solar panels to help extend the life of future probes. This also gave the R&D team the idea to start the Skywatch program, which will be a series of planetary photography probes flying around Earth at different inclinations to collect data of the surface of the Earth overall. This will be achieved over 4 to 6 launches, starting at the Cape, but eventually being finalized at Vandenberg Space Center, as some of the polar inclination orbits will be easier to achieve there. One of the most updated features about this camera is it will be controlled remotely, as well as have a small RCS booster on the bottom to help with a more controlled deorbit. The entire camera will be deorbited, but the capsule with the data will be separated to be returned safely to the surface of the Earth, while the rest of the debris burns up in the atmosphere. Using some of the funding we recently got from our last contract, we decided to upgrade the astronaut complex, thus allowing our astronauts to be able to EVA while in space. Now, before the year finishes, we did get enough science points to start the research on the first official orbital capsules, which we will go ahead and get going here shortly. We hope by this time next year we will be prepped for human space flight as well as lunar landings. If not, we hope to at least get the first man into orbit by the beginning of 1960, and possibly push for lunar flybys with a crew member by the end of 1960, early 1961. Our next goal next year is also going to be interplanetary, visiting Mars and Venus. But at that point, this is the end of the episode. I want to thank you guys for stopping by. Hope you guys liked the content. If you did, feel free to give it a like. Don't forget to share and or sub if you haven't already. But either way, I'm going to let you guys go. Check out the Discord, and I hope I see you guys next time in the year 1959.